guys, welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Hey guys, welcome to Fast Keto. This episode is brought to you by Ketogenic Girl, and if you haven't picked up a copy of my brand new cookbook, Keto Essentials, head to Amazon today. It actually is 31% off. It's on sale right now, and it is everything that you need to know from a beginner to being advanced keto about getting the optimal results out of your ketogenic lifestyle. It explains everything about why keto works, how to test, how to interpret results, and lots of keto hacks to get you results quicker. It also has 150 of my most favorite decadent, rich, delicious keto recipes that are so nourishing and are so much fun to cook. Some of my favorite recipes like my keto pad thai, fettuccine alfredo, some of my favorite desserts like keto cookie dough. There are so many delicious treats and ways that you can make keto work for you. A lot of easy to find ingredients. I don't put a lot of hard to find ingredients in the recipes, and everything you can find at most supermarkets. I do a lot of traveling and I'm able to make these recipes just with basic ingredients from the store. So lots of delicious, tasty recipes. It's on sale, 31% off. Head to Amazon and look up Keto Essentials and get the cookbook. Leave me a review. I would love to hear what you think, and also tag me if you post any photos of the recipes. It's my favorite thing to see your creations based on my recipes. So that's Keto Essentials on Amazon. Hey guys, welcome to this latest episode of Fast Keto. I am so pumped about today's guest, who is Dr. John Limansky. He is a keto doctor, and he is one of the most passionate biohackers that I've gotten to meet over the years of being involved in keto. He is a board-certified physician of internal medicine and worked as a hospitalist and clinician for over 5 years, treating an average of 30 patients per day. A lot of the diseases that he was encountering on a daily basis were, in his opinion, a direct result of the standard American diet. He saw that a lot of these diseases were and are in fact preventable and reversible through proper nutrition and diet. He began to share more and more about a method that he developed with his family, and he started to share that method with his extended family and friends, and then with his patients, which is using a ketogenic lifestyle and optimizing sleep, exercise, light exposure, stress reduction, and good feeling activities like yoga and meditation. And we get to talk about all of this on the show today. So it's a really well-rounded interview. We got to talk about all these different aspects. And if any of you have also been following Jimmy Moore and Dr. John Limansky's recent experiment with the high protein diet, we talked a lot about protein and gluconeogenesis and what happens in the body, and some of the findings that John had from doing this experiment. All of the results Jimmy Moore and John are going to be sharing on their episode of the Keto Hacking MD podcast, which is going to be out this week. So we don't spoil any of the results, but we do get to talk a little bit about being on a high protein diet versus being in keto. I talk a little bit about myself, my own experience with higher protein diets as well. And we just got to talk about so many incredibly interesting aspects of a ketogenic diet and how to optimize your health with using all these different biohacks, and keto being the most powerful of all of them. So it was such a fun podcast. We talked about all these different areas related back to overall healthy living, feeling good in your body, and what being in optimal ketosis means for an individual person. So I hope that you enjoy the interview with Dr. John Limansky. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown. So you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian. Hey, John, it's great to have you joining us here today. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Vanessa, for having me on. I'm super excited to be on and talk to you.
Wicked. Yeah, you've been doing some traveling, but you've also been doing a lot of really interesting self-experimenting that I've been closely following online. A lot of people have been too. So I was going to say, how does it feel to be back in San Francisco? But you've also just been doing a lot of different experiments. So I think you're fasting again this week, right?
Yeah, I'm actually starting this morning with a fast. So constant experimentation. And Jimmy and I just finished up 7-day high protein kind of experiment, which we're going to talk about pretty soon. So always experimenting, but it feels good to be home. And we'll see, today is day 1 of the fast. So you got me at a good time.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to be more sharp and clear and hungry, right?
Yeah, well, at least it wasn't like on day 2 or 3 where I would be a zombie. So.
Oh, so this is
Feeling
day
good?
3?
No, this is I just started. Last night was my last meal.
One.
So,
okay.
So I haven't hit the day 2, 3 kind of difficult stages yet.
Yeah, you still have a little bit of glucose to power you through, especially your brain. Exactly. So for anyone who might not be familiar with you or your work, it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm a physician in internal medicine. I have been doing keto for quite a long time for myself and for patients. I worked in a hospital setting as a hospitalist for about a decade and was able to see kind of the end results of everything that you and I are trying to combat in people and realize that I could actually serve people a lot better by trying to do more of preventative health and really focus on nutrition and lifestyle changes. And so I changed directions and started really working with people to try to prevent them from seeing me in the hospital setting, and found that I made much more of a difference in people's lives and was inspired by people who were really trying to change their life and get healthier. So for the last 5 years or so, I've been really just focusing mostly on that preventative health. And so now I have kind of a virtual office. So I see people all over the country, all over the world, and really try to become an advocate on the social media kind of side of things for people who are trying to take control of their life and get healthier.
And what do you think of personal health advocacy when it comes to health?
I think it's essential. I think it's a difficult situation because there's so much misinformation or wrong information online that you have to be very careful and get a really good resource like yourself. Obviously, I'm pretty biased, so myself, but there's very good resources out there. So if you have a good resource, and if you're listening to this podcast, obviously you probably do, I think taking control of your health is essential. It's probably the most important thing that you can do because we are all very, very different individually. We have different backgrounds, genetic makeups, different life experiences. And so to make a blanket statement for everybody to do one thing, I think is wrong. So yeah, I think it's essential.
Right. So what does biohacking mean to you? That's something that you do for yourself personally, right?
Yeah, and I probably should have mentioned that. So I combine a ketogenic lifestyle with biohacking with myself and my clients and friends and family to really kind of optimize people's health. So biohacking is getting to be a little bit trendier. It's been around, for thousands of years. The yogis used it in their meditation, in their yoga practice to really kind of centralize their health. So the way I kind of look at biohacking is, in a nutshell, I would say it's making the environment work for you instead of against you. So modern living is great. We have so much technology. We have ability to create food products. Everything is at our fingertips. If you live in a big city, you can order whatever food you want at any time. But the question is, what is the negative consequences of having all that? So things like being in front of your computer, being on the iPhone, being on tablets, all those things have some negative consequences. And biohacking is figuring out, how do you incorporate a healthy lifestyle within our kind of modern way of living? And so that's really kind of what I focus on. Keto is, in my mind, essentially the ultimate biohack.
Oh, I fully agree with you there.
Yeah.
I love that. The ultimate biohack. How did you find keto initially yourself?
When I was in medical school, we had to do an experiment. I'm dating myself, but this is a long time ago. And basically, we had to do lab work to see kind of what our metabolic status was. And at the time, I was in my mid 20s. I was working out 6 days a week. I had a six pack. I was really into triathlons. And so I was exercising like crazy, thought I ate healthy. And when I got my lab results back, I realized that I was pre diabetic and I had started getting insulin resistance. And I was like floored by that. At the time, I was eating mostly kind of more of a vegetarian diet with a little bit of protein. And I figured this has got to be healthy. And it turns out that it wasn't specifically for me. So at the time, this is, 13 years ago, there wasn't much information out there about keto, but I started reading, there was stuff about Atkins. So I started reading about Atkins, started kind of tinkering with different types of eating, started incorporating some healthy fats into my diet, which I wasn't doing before. And now with kind of the burst of keto in social media, online, it's become, obviously very popular, but it's been kind of an evolution of sorts where I've kind of tinkered with it and started incorporating into my lifestyle.
That's great. And you mentioned that you do biohacking mostly for yourself, but also with some friends and family. So do you also do it with your patients that you work with?
Like I mentioned before, I think keto is really kind of the ultimate biohack. So I start with nutrition. So I start with a ketogenic lifestyle, converting people over to it, getting them healthy, resetting their metabolism. But my view is that you cannot just do one thing in a bubble. So you cannot just do nutrition in a bubble and expect that things are going to be as healthy as possible. In my experience in life, working late nights as a physician, I can tell you that if your sleep is not very good, your health is not going to be very good, your adaptation to a keto way of living is not going to be very good. So you have to really start with good nutrition, but then also look at all the other factors in your life to figure out, okay, how is this improving or negatively affecting my life? And biohacking really plays into that, where we address things like sleep, stress reduction, exercise, things like that. So I use biohacking almost exclusively with my clients to make sure that we are really maximizing the benefits of a ketogenic lifestyle.
So what are some of your maybe top 5 favorite biohacks in terms of their overall impact that?
Like I mentioned, obviously nutrition, I still think if you look at it as a pyramid, I think nutrition, keto specifically, is at the base. If you don't do nutrition, all the other biohacks are essentially not really going to work as effectively as you want them to. Once you have that kind of dialed in, I focus on sleep. So sleep is essential, not only from like a hormonal perspective, increasing cortisol, norepinephrine, but also just in terms of recovery. So your body is essentially recovering, producing growth hormone at night to really try to repair the body. So dialing down sleep, figuring out how to improve sleep. Exercise is another very important one. The type of exercise you do, when you do it, can either negatively impact your ability to lose weight, improve your health, or improve it. And then things like light exposure. So depending on where you live, your access to sunlight is either very good or very bad. And there's ways to kind of hack that and incorporate, artificial light to really improve your cellular metabolism. And probably the last one I would say is meditation, yoga, relaxation. If you're like me, and I think you probably are, we're always going, we're always on the go. And so sometimes taking 10 minutes to just kind of settle down, give thanks to whatever it is you're thankful for that day. Doing 10 minutes of meditation can go a long ways towards really improving your health. And it's pretty impressive, some of the studies that are coming out, at how impactful those things can be. And especially in our modern way of living, it's hard to do that. I don't know if you're like me, but my brain is always going. So it's hard for me to just like slow down, not think, not talk. And so, but it's very important as far as improving your health.
That's really interesting. I love these 5 different pillars because I agree with you. For me, I really believe that nutrition and diet are the most powerful lever in terms of the impact on your health. But then these other things really complement it and build it. So, going to bed for me before 10 p.m. at night, I call it catching the happy train. I think I read that in a book by Marcy Shimoff. And it really makes such a huge impact. And it wasn't until I started looking at the cycles of repair, like you were saying, that, growth hormone spikes happen right after you go to bed. So if you stay up too late, you're going to miss some of the biggest repair hormone effects that you get if you are going to bed too late every night. And you use an app, right, to to measure your sleep quality?
I do, yeah. I use the Oura Ring. I'm excited to see what the new version comes out with, but I use it to basically track not only deep sleep, REM sleep, quality of sleep, temperature, and I use it for a few other things. I also use HRV measurement quite a bit with myself and my clients to kind of track how well the body's recovered. My wife actually makes fun of me because I usually go to bed by like 9:30, which makes me pretty old. But specifically because of all the benefits of sleep. And I've worked really hard in the last couple of years to dial down my sleep and try to figure out how I can effectively get the best sleep possible for repair and recovery.
So when it comes to light exposure, you're talking about vitamin D, but do you also try to avoid some of the blue light effects from screens? Is that, I guess, plays into the sleep quality?
Yeah, correct. So, when we talk about light, there's so many different spectrums of light. The research that's coming out is pretty impressive that if you go back historically, before we had all this technology, you wake up when the sun comes up and you go to bed when the sun goes down, and that's your normal circadian rhythm. Because we are indoors most of the day, a lot of us with work, and we have halogen lights, and some people will get up before the sun rises. So your body has no idea where it's supposed to be in terms of its circadian rhythm. And those circadian rhythms are being shown to affect not only your ability to lose weight, but also your ability to really tap into those deep levels of sleep that you need. So things like you mentioned blue light. So I will not be on technology for about 2 to 3 hours before I go to bed. So I'll avoid, iPhones, iPads, computers, TVs. I used to read a lot on my iPad, and now what I did is I started buying hard books again, which I actually like. And so at night, I'll only read books like that. I use blue light blocking glasses, but even things like in the morning when I wake up. So I wake up before the sun rises. I wake up pretty early, 4:30. So in order to kind of reset my circadian clock, I use artificial light in my ears and also exposure to my body. And that kind of sets my body up for the day. And that's another biohack in terms of light exposure. I try to go outside as much as possible. I live in California, so I'm pretty lucky in that regards to get actual sun exposure, to get UVA, UVB light. We think of sun exposure as it's the cause of cancer. And yeah, if you sit out for 3 hours and get, roasted, yeah, you're going to probably get some form of skin cancer down the road. But getting 10 to 15 minutes of actual natural sunlight is one of the best things you can do, not only for vitamin D, but also just health reasons, how you feel, mitochondrial function, things like that. So that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about light.
Yeah, that's really cool. When I was we were talking a bit about the Biohacking Summit last year. Someone who was there I was speaking to had this light that goes in his earphones that was helping him adjust so he didn't get jet lag. I had never seen that before.
Was that Ben Greenfield?
He was definitely there. I think it was Bob, Quantified Bob.
Oh, yeah.
He was showing us these earphones that he had, which was really neat. I have a question for you on sunscreen just while we're there, because there's been so much talk about, avoiding the sun for so long. And then that put a lot of people in a state of having really low vitamin D.
Right.
And then, using all these sunscreens and things to block the UVB or UVA rays. But then if you're using these creams, you're blocking it, but you're also potentially getting harmful effects from toxins in the cream. So what's your opinion on protecting your skin, being in the sun, enjoying the sun, but then do you use any kind of like skin creams or anything like that?
Yeah, great question. In general, I don't use sunscreen. I don't recommend using sunscreen. There is a caveat to that. If you are, predisposed to having skin cancer, you have a family history of skin cancer, obviously that's something you want to talk with your doctor about and get probably a sunscreen that doesn't have a lot of the hexene-based products in it. So a lot of those sunscreens are, oil-based, and that's the toxins that you're talking about. Generally, what I recommend is start off slow. So do 10 minutes in the sun, build up to it every day, 10 to 15 minutes. Eventually, you can build up where you have your own natural sun protection in the form of melanocytes. So when you get tan, there are cells in your body called melanocytes that start making more melanin, which is the color that you see on people's skin. People have fear of things like melanoma. So melanoma actually happens usually for children who are very young because the melanocytes are actually on the surface of the skin when you're a baby, and then they go down into a deeper level of the dermis. So if you get a lot of exposure as a little baby, down the road, your chance of getting melanoma goes up But like I mentioned before, you don't want to go out and get fried and do 4 hours of sun exposure without any sunscreen if you haven't been out in the sun all day. So generally, I say build up to it, and your chance of getting skin cancer is minimal at that point.
That's great. So you mostly recommend getting vitamin D when you can, and do you need to do anything else to complement that in terms of supplements? There's a lot of talk about needing vitamin K in order to synthesize the vitamin D, or?
Yeah, one of the things about nutrition is that we try to figure out the active kind of component, and we try to remove that and then take it as a pill. In certain areas where you don't get exposure to sun, right? I mean, so like take for instance, anything that you think about, that's what we do. We just try to get the active ingredient and take it. And it usually doesn't work that way. In terms of getting vitamin K, vitamin D, the best thing you can do is get a very, very good base nutrition where you'll get all the vitamin K you need, and then get sun exposure and you'll get all the vitamin D you need. So that's usually my basis, is trying to do less and get more out of it.
Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 28-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group, and you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really works well for them. And everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive. And it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com. And it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. And now back to our interview. Now, going back to your personal lifestyle, I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. So you mentioned that you were vegetarian for a long time. You did some protein. You ate more of a vegetarian diet. And then when you saw some of the health markers, you started to make changes and you got into keto. So what is optimal ketosis for you?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked this. And again, we get fixated on numbers instead of really focusing on how we feel. Mm-hmm. So if I had to sum it up, I would say optimal ketosis is being in a state of mind where your mind is really sharp, you feel great energy, and you're not fixated on when I'm going to eat or what I'm going to eat. And that's very liberating. It's almost like a state of nirvana, right? I used to be either eating, thinking about what I'm going to eat, or beating myself up about what I just ate. Right. And now I go, days where I'm just like, okay, I need to eat something, because I'm not always in the sense, my brain is not always sending signals saying, hey, you're starving, you need to eat something. And so everybody has to figure out what that state is for them. And that's really what I think optimal ketosis is.
That's a great definition. A lot of people ask me all the time about numbers. And when I was in Mallorca, I was saying, well, this is how you test for ketosis on a blood level.
Right.
But you want to be journaling, like, what do those numbers actually mean for me? Where do I feel my best? And then test yourself. I feel awesome today. Okay, so what does that mean for you in terms of ketones and your blood glucose for you personally? Because you feel great. You want to be able to repeat that, so that optimal ketosis can mean different things for different people. So what are some of the benefits that you've gleaned from following a ketogenic lifestyle?
Oh, there are numerous. Where do I start? Obviously, energy level is through the roof. I'm nearing 40, so going to have my midlife crisis pretty soon. But I feel energetic. Weight is never an issue. My lab markers are fantastic. I'm happy. I sleep well. I feel connected to my friends and family. It gives me, my days are very packed and I have enough energy to accomplish quite a bit. And then for me, because I've seen the outcomes of a Western way of living in the hospital setting. And obviously, I'm kind of jaded because I've seen the worst case scenario. I know that for me, I'm never going to have to see that. I'm never going to have to be that person in the hospital. My goal is I hit 110 and I drop dead and I'm happy. And so for me, being in ketosis and biohacking is all about being as healthy as possible, being as productive as possible, and being a good person. And that's really what it's afforded me.
Now, I love that you're always changing things up. I'm the same, you and Jimmy were doing your high protein experiment. And right after I was in Mallorca, I decided just to test higher protein. A lot of it's been, because there's been so much debate about protein levels and thresholds. And, people are always asking about gluconeogenesis and if it's a real thing or what exactly is happening in the body. And I found it really interesting with your recent experiment. I was telling you that I had the same thing. When I overdo protein, I control carbs for what they are. Usually I get kicked out of ketosis and I wake up with really high fasting blood glucose and I have 0 to no ketones, which is the opposite for me when I'm in ketosis, which is I have really, really high ketone numbers and very low stable blood glucose. So what I really want to get to is what is this concept of gluconeogenesis and is it really happening or is it just that the body becomes overwhelmed by the amount of protein that's being eaten, in your opinion?
So we're going to get into the details of our results in an upcoming podcast. But what I would say is that it depends. So one of the reasons that we did the high protein experiment is because it's out there and people are becoming convinced that it's a very healthy way of eating. And we wanted to show whether or not it was. And our results are going to be fascinating. It depends on metabolically where you begin from. A lot of people who obviously get into the ketogenic lifestyle have done tremendous amount of damage to their body. They're insulin resistant, they're frank diabetic. Those people are going to have a dramatically different response to high protein intake versus somebody like you or me, who I'm assuming that you're not insulin resistant. I'm not insulin resistant. My metabolic markers are very good. So in general, what happens is, let's say you just take protein. So protein, you break it down with acid in your stomach into amino acids. Those amino acids get absorbed into the portal system, which is the blood system to the intestinal tract, and it goes to the liver. In the liver, your body actually uses insulin to convert those into glucose via gluconeogenesis. And then you have to do something with that. So your body is obviously using proteins all day long to repair itself. If you're building muscle, it's using proteins in order to do that. The excess protein then becomes something where your body has to utilize it, and that either it becomes glucose or it becomes fat. You can't store it in any other way. And so for you, if you have high levels of protein and you're utilizing the ones you need, the excess is going to have to be either glucose or then eventually get converted back into fat stores. And that's really, in a nutshell, what's happening. And so that's why you get kicked out of ketosis, your glucose goes up. Same thing happens with me. Now, there's a flip side response, which is something called glucagon, and that can obviously impact things in a different way. And I don't want to get too much into it because we have a lot to talk about and I want people to hear our results. But that's kind of in a nutshell what's happening. And the only thing I was going to say, so for people who are like, bodybuilders or endurance athletes or people who are really active using their muscles nonstop, they can probably afford a higher protein load than somebody who's not as active or not as functional, I guess.
Right. And I guess one of the things that causes a lot of confusion for people is there's this article done out there. It's the Keto Gains maybe website where they said, eating excess protein, it doesn't turn to chocolate cake in your blood. But yeah. I understand what they're trying to say. It doesn't turn to chocolate cake in the blood, but if you do eat more than you're utilizing in terms of your exercise level, activity level, or new tissue formation, like you were saying, then the body does need to store it in some way in the tissues, and it needs to be glycogen being stored in your muscle tissues, or it'll turn into fatty acids to be stored in that form in your fat cells, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you look at, and that's kind of why I mentioned, if you're a bodybuilder, if you look at the guys who are really benefiting from a high protein diet, it's the group of Keto Gains, Sean Baker, Ted Naiman, guys who are putting on much more muscle mass. And so that's great. But can you apply that to everybody else who is maybe not trying to put on a lot of muscle mass, doesn't do that much exercise? Well, no, something has to happen with those excess amino acids. Plus, we haven't really talked about amino acids have variable ability to raise insulin. So some amino acids are much more insulinogenic. So you can really dive into the weeds in this. And it would be, like a 10-hour series of podcasts talking about just the impact of protein on, metabolism. And I think that's one of the issues that we get into, is that we try to simplify things that are extremely complex. Just for one individual, it's extremely complex. Now, everybody has a dramatically different response, but yeah, we're trying to say simply that, protein is good. It's hard to say that without knowing exactly what's going on with that individual. And so that's kind of the point that we're trying to make.
Right. And that's what I love about biohacking. When I was speaking at that summit last year, the Biohacker Summit, I was saying, to me, you have this little device you can buy for $17, and you can use it to actually learn about how your body personally responds, individually responds to the things that you do, to what you eat, and to your activity levels and all these things. And that's what's so amazing about health tech. I think there's even more exciting health tech that's on its way that, is going to continue to be able to give us this amazing feedback. But it's all about learning for yourself how different things work. But at the same time, there are some generally repeated outcomes that do happen. Like, it happened for, when I saw your results, I said, that's exactly what happened to me when I was in Spain. I did, 2 weeks, I went way over my protein threshold because I wanted to test the numbers and show people this is what happens to me when I do it. And I'm a fairly active person, relatively lean, and I follow a very strict ketogenic diet most of the time. So it is really fascinating. I can't wait to listen to yours and Jimmy's podcast, because you're going to be sharing all the results, and definitely don't want to spoil any of those. It's going to be an awesome episode. And I know you're going to be doing a few of them just to cover all of this, because it's so interesting to see how you both reacted so differently as well to the experiment, which is really cool. But I guess at the end of this, my question for you is going to be, you try different things. You've been doing keto, I think you mentioned, for 13 years. Do you ever change it up in other ways? Or have you kind of zeroed it on what works for you? And so that's, kind of what you're sticking to.
You name it, I've done it. I've tried everything out there. Before I'm pretty new to social media, I would say, in the last, year or two, but I've been doing this for a long time, where I will try everything out there to see what it does to my body. And I measure things in terms of subjective, like how I feel, etc. And then objectively, with lab markers, but also different data points. And I found out, for me, what works, like you mentioned, you're pretty strict keto most of the time. And I'm sure for you, it's been a journey to figure out, okay, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. Same thing with me. A lot of people who start off on a keto diet do things that are very heavy in dairy, for instance. And depending on where in the world you live, me in the United States, the type of dairy that I get is very different than it would be for people in Europe, in Mallorca, or in Canada, or in Prague, things like that. So it's figuring out what actually works for you. And the way that I do it is I test a lot to see, okay, look, I'm wondering if this certain food item is going to affect me in a positive or negative way. And I'll actually measure ketones, glucose, high sensitivity CRP lab markers to see, does this actually impact me? And then if it does in a negative way, I tend to avoid it, because, I'm getting up there in my age, and I have children, and I want to make sure that I'm healthy and energetic and don't have health problems, so that I can really spend quality time with them. So at this point, though, I've figured out what works for me. I figured out, in general, if I'm not doing experiments, I know what works for me. And so I stick to it pretty religiously.
So between the two, between fasting and high protein, I think I can guess which one you preferred, but how do you compare the two?
Fasting gets you to a point of, I've used the word before on your podcast, but nirvana. It's like you're very clear, you're very sharp, you feel very calm. Obviously, it takes a little while to get there. Once you get there, it's an extremely liberating feeling. It's hard to describe, and I think anybody who wants to try it has to try it to see kind of what it does for them. Granted, it takes 2 to 3 days to really get there, but once you get there, plus I know based on the studies that are out there, the benefits that I'm getting long-term in terms of longevity, in terms of cancer prevention, in terms of like mTOR suppression. So I know that there's actual benefits from it, and I feel great. I'm pretty skinny. My body fat percentage is low, so I don't do it for weight loss. I do it for health benefits. With high protein, I didn't feel very good. I'll just be honest. I didn't feel very good. I felt the way I used to feel when I would eat kind of that vegetarian low protein diet, where I would eat something, be ravenous within 30 minutes, feel almost hypoglycemic, although I wasn't, feel low energy, cranky. Luckily, I did it while I was on vacation, so I didn't have a whole bunch of stressors, but I didn't feel good. And for me, interestingly enough, some of the markers that I checked actually got better, but the flip side is I didn't feel good. So which one is better? Do you want to feel good and have better markers, or do you want to feel horrible and have some worse markers but some better markers? And for me, it's a no-brainer. I'd rather feel good and know that I'm doing benefit for my body.
Absolutely. And that nirvana state that you described, there's also all that incredible autophagy that happens that I know you guys have been getting the benefits of, with your fasting experiment. But I experienced so many of those same things being in nutritional ketosis because it's the same primarily, fat-fueled state. And I really believe that some of the incredible therapeutic effects that come from ketones engender a lot of that state because you're burning fat from your body or you're burning fat that you're eating as well. And I did read that it's possible that ketones could eventually become reclassified as a fourth macronutrient. And I love bringing this up because I really think that would be pretty revolutionary if that happened.
I think you need to trademark that before it happens because I agree 100%. If you don't do it, I'm going to do it after we get off this. Well, I think ketones, there's a question of which one is better. Is it glucose or ketones? And the body really will utilize whatever is there. So if you have a whole bunch of glucose in your system, your body's going to use it. But if you generate ketones, your body's going to use that. And at that time, usually in order to have those ketones, you're not going to have glucose in your system. And I agree. I think the information that we're getting, especially in the scientific community from guys like D'Agostino, Siegfried, a lot of the research that's coming out on the benefits of ketones, not just for weight loss, but for health issues is unbelievable. And, as a medical doctor, I approach ketosis more from like a health perspective. And you'll hear me talk about how, the global focus is on weight loss. And I understand why people are all obsessed with weight loss because that's our society. But I look at it more as, this developed from a medical tool. Like this was for epilepsy, for cancer. This is something that is a medical tool that we should view it that way. And yeah, the side effect is you'll lose weight and you'll feel great. But think about the benefits that you're actually doing for your health, your cellular health, which now we can measure. And so that's kind of how I view it. But absolutely, I think it needs to be up there and classified probably as the best, macronutrient.
It's really incredible, all the benefits for the brain that are coming out and all the potential therapeutic application is the fact that the body makes ketones for you. I'm not someone who uses exogenous ketones or anything. I do think that they might have a lot of potential in the future for someone who can't make them from their own diet, but it still is a very exciting frontier. A lot of people, like you said, focus on fat loss. It's something that will be a motivator for someone maybe to try a ketogenic diet who's maybe, we have very low future self-attunement in our society. We don't really think about who we're going to be or picture ourselves as elderly. Very often, we don't really think about ourselves in the future that much. So sometimes having a motivator like an immediate health condition or just wanting to lose for someone, maybe lose 40, 50 pounds or even less than that can really be a motivator. So is fat loss guaranteed for someone when they're in keto? And how does someone optimize for that?
So it depends, is usually my answer for most questions because it's so variable depending on the person. But so it's not guaranteed. I will put it right there. Let's say you eat, 5,000 calories of fat. And yeah, you can get into ketosis doing that, but you're not necessarily going to lose weight. The way I kind of look at ketogenic diet is something that's very balanced. So people say it's an extreme diet. I would argue the opposite. I would say it's a very balanced diet. If you do it right, you're thinking about, good source of protein, a good source of fat, and a good source of carbohydrates. If you do it in the right way, with the right macros, with the right amount of calories, then yeah, absolutely, you will lose ton of fat, and it's been shown over and over with multiple people. But you have to get a good resource, and that's why, especially with Google trend of keto being the most searched word out there, I'm concerned that a lot of people are just kind of putting out whatever they think is keto versus people like yourself that have a lot of experience that are actually showing, look, this is the best way to do it. So I usually tell people, get a good resource and figure out what that resource is and follow that person or follow a few people to really get the good information that will maximize your ability to be successful.
Right. And some people, they can be in a state of nutritional ketosis, but not burning fat because, for example, they're doing what I call nursing, drinking beverages all day long throughout their meals. So the body never gets a break from insulin and never gets to actually burn fat. What I do find interesting is that sometimes someone can not be burning fat just because of that, because there's this constant insulin presence. And
Sure.
because of that, they need to do things to bring the insulin levels down. So what are some of the things you recommend to people to do that?
Probably the easiest thing, and we've talked about it, is fasting. People get quite concerned about doing a long-term fast, and I don't think you need to do that. You can do a intermittent fast, 24-hour fast, 36-hour fast. That's probably the most powerful, cheapest way of bringing your insulin levels down. Then I usually focus on quality. So in the keto world, I see a lot of people post pictures of going to fast food, taking off the bun of a hamburger and saying this is keto. And that, if you had to have one thing that drives me absolutely crazy, that would probably be it. Right? Because that meat is grain-fed, antibiotic, even if they say it's not, it's full of hormones. The cheese is not cheese. The oils that were used to cook it are very pro-inflammatory. And so the reason I kind of mentioned I look at keto more as improving your metabolic markers and your health is because you need to make sure that you focus on quality of ingredients. So grass-fed food, good oils, because that's going to be less inflammatory. And so you're actually going to decrease your insulin because you decrease your cortisol, so you'll have more success. Also, the timing of when you eat. So let's say you don't want to do fasting. Well, if you eat late at night, you could be on the best macro nutrient kind of concentration, and you eat at midnight, well, you're probably not going to lose as much weight as you think you're going to. So there's a PhD down in San Diego, his name is Dr. Penda, who's looking at time-restricted eating. And one study, which is fascinating, is they looked at same amount of food, same quality of food, but just they ate within an 8-hour window. Those people who did that lost more weight than people who just ate whenever they wanted to, because there's that circadian rhythm that I talked about earlier, and it applies to not only light, but it also applies to food and insulin and growth hormone production. So if you were to do those three things, focus on quality, do some sort of fasting, whether it's intermittent or long-term fasting, and then restrict your eating, late at night, you'll have much more success.
Yes, I did actually was quoting a study. I'm not sure if it was the same one where they did that. People were eating the same amount of food, but they were closing their eating window earlier in the day.
Yep.
And they lost a lot more weight than those who didn't. And when you think about all that growth hormone and fat burning that happens while you sleep,
yep.
Eating late, you can just throw that right off and you won't get any of those benefits.
And not only that, but it actually will negatively impact your sleep. So they also showed that if you eat late at night or just when you eat, you're actually suppressing melatonin production from your pancreas, which is crazy.
Wow.
Nobody would have thought that. So when you eat, let's say, late at night, you're going to suppress melatonin from the pancreas. And so melatonin is needed to really activate deep sleep and REM sleep. And so you'll have less of it. So your sleep patterns will be off. Now, the next day, your cortisol levels are higher, your insulin levels are higher, you're hungrier. So your chance of eating something much worse goes up. And then you get into this vicious cycle where now you don't feel good, so you don't sleep well, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's all these things come into play, and that's why I love biohacking so much, because all these things matter. So if we're focusing on weight loss and health, all these things actually really matter.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I 100% agree. Now, just to touch a little bit on enhancing body composition. So you do a lot of training and exercise. What are some of the sort of exercises that you do in a day-to-day in order to optimize for body composition?
Yeah, it could be as simple as taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Have a stand-up desk at work, try to walk to a store instead of driving. Simple things like that can go a long way to really improving your ability to fat burn. If you're more into exercise, things like weightlifting. Even for women, there's a big fear, especially for women, that you're going to become, huge and have all this muscle. Chances of that happening are pretty slim. So just doing resistance training is one of the best things you can do, because what happens? Well, you do build some muscle, and that muscle actually utilizes more energy throughout the day. So your BMR, your basal metabolic rate goes up. So you're burning more. Things like HIIT, so high intensity interval training, is one of the best things you can do, because what happens? You actually increase not only the density of your mitochondria, but their function. So the mitochondria is really, I look at it as kind of the battery of every cell. And most of our cells have thousands of these mitochondria. And if they're not functioning properly, then you're not burning energy effectively. When you do something like HIIT, you're actually making them more effective, and you're making more of them. So not only are you making more muscle, but you're also making more batteries that are using more energy. And so you'll burn through your fat stores much faster that way. You can also do things like timing of the exercise. So what I tend to do is I'll exercise very hard, and then I'll eat my meal, about an hour afterwards. And so the muscles are really ready for that glucose, whatever glucose I'm going to absorb. Your muscles are ready for it. The protein that you consume, your muscles need it. So you can do a lot of things to kind of hack your timing of food intake and the types of exercise you do to really improve not only fat loss, but muscle building.
Awesome. And for fat loss, do you believe that someone has to have a caloric deficit if they're in keto in order to have that fat loss?
No, this is one of those kind of controversial topics. I think when you say caloric restriction, I always get concerned, or caloric deficit, I always get kind of concerned, because a lot of times most of the diets that are out there are essentially all the same, in the sense that they're all calorie deficit diets of some sort. You either restrict something or else. But the basic premise is that you're restricting calories. And when you do that, even if you do a ketogenic calorie restricted diet, you can actually lower your resting metabolism. So I tend to advise people not to do a calorie restricted or calorie deficit. Even if it's keto, you could figure out what your basic metabolic rate is. And you can do that very easily. Go to a DEXA place, and there's a test that you can do to figure that out. Once you know kind of what your basic metabolic rate is, then you know how many calories you really should consume. So if you stay like isocaloric or even a little bit hypercaloric, and you're ketogenic adapted, then you're still going to burn fat. It might not be as quick if you had a calorie deficit, but you're not going to affect your metabolism, which is really what we want. We want to maintain that metabolic rate.
Yes. And that's one of the things I love the most about keto is it revs your metabolism. It gets those mitochondrial energy factors spinning, because you're not in this starvation mode or caloric restriction mode where your body has to shut down your thyroid production in order to keep you alive. But I think there is still a lot of questions out there for people who are not maybe losing weight or burning fat, men and women, on keto, and wondering, do I have to still have, like you said, some kind of deficit or hypercaloric level at the end of the day in order for my body to be burning more fat? And for me, I think the time restricted eating, it really comes back down to that, and also lowering insulin so that your body will be using fat for energy throughout the day, and you'll be primarily fat burner, even if you don't have a huge, caloric deficit.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is very important to people to know is that once you become fat adapted, you can do time restricted eating, intermittent fasting, and when you're doing that, all you're doing is burning whatever glycogen you have left, but mostly your fat. And then when you go and eat something, your body obviously uses that energy, processes whatever you ate, but then you go right back into kind of a fat burning mode. That's really the power of time restricted eating or intermittent fasting or whatever you want to call it, is that you're using the energy you get when you eat, but then when you're not eating all that time, your body's actually burning through the fat that you eat or that you have on your body as energy. So that's really the power of it.
Absolutely. Now, what are some of the tips that you give people in order to make sure, for example, they keep their electrolytes up? And I was just going to say, is there, in your opinion, an ideal sodium to potassium ratio on keto?
You can get really into the weeds of this. And so it's hard to make a general statement for everybody in terms of ratios. What I would say is if you are taking salt supplements, there's a lot of them out there. You can do something as simple as just doing Himalayan salt under your tongue when you kind of feel symptoms of, low sodium intake. So if you feel a little dizzy, a little tired, I generally overdo it in terms of the amount of electrolytes, but I would say a caveat is I don't have any liver dysfunction. I don't have any kidney dysfunction. I don't have any heart problems. So if you have any of those things, you have to be very careful of your sodium, potassium, magnesium intake. And you should really see a doctor and follow with a doctor for that. But in general, the kidneys are very good at adapting to electrolyte balance, and they're going to regulate the sodium, potassium very effectively. What happens is initially, and most people I think who are listening will know this, that when you're on a Western diet, you have high levels of insulin. So your kidneys hold on to sodium and with that water. When you go on a ketogenic diet for the first time, you drop your insulin, your kidneys start losing sodium, and so you lose water, and that's why you feel dizzy in the keto flu. So initially, it's very important to get high levels of electrolytes to combat that. As your body kind of gets into an equilibrium where it understands where you're at and you maintain a ketogenic lifestyle, those electrolytes are going to be balanced much better by your kidneys. So at that point, I take salt supplements just because it makes me feel better. But if I were to check my labs, I could tell you that my potassium, my sodium is going to be highly regulated and in a normal range. So I don't know if that's really a great answer to your question, but that's kind of how I view it.
That's a great point. And you need, to have that sodium,
Right.
potassium balance for your energy, for your cells, like you were mentioning, the cell battery. So I always say for people to include a lot of potassium rich foods in their diet. There's so many of the keto ones are some of the best ones, avocados and
Right.
salmon and leafy greens. And if you make sure that like you said, you're optimizing for quality in your diet, then you won't need to worry too much about adding in external sources, like you were saying, of magnesium, potassium, all these things, and just supplementing with sea salt as needed. And like you said, if you have any liver, kidney conditions or heart conditions or anything else, then you need to be regulating that with your doctor specifically to you. So what are some top tips you have for people who want to get into keto?
Yeah. So I look at keto just the way you do, where this is long term. So my biggest pet peeve with the word keto diet is that I don't view this as a diet. I view it as a lifestyle. So I always tell people make a long-term plan. A lot of people will contact me and say, look, I want to lose 50 pounds in 3 weeks because I have a wedding. And I say, well, that's great, but that's not realistic. Make a long-term plan. Say, okay, in 1 month, this is my goal. In 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, so that you have an idea that this is going to be a long-term way of doing things. The second thing I tell people is to get your family, friends, coworkers, get people on board with what you're doing and do it as a group. Find a community like yours, or there's, a lot of very good communities out there, so that you have a support system. And then that's going to give you the ability to be successful over long term. I tell people, like we've mentioned, to focus on quality, not quantity. So again, I look at it as anti-inflammatory, how to find quality products that are actually going to be anti-inflammatory and keto at the same time. There's a very big difference between fast food keto and healthy, real food keto. And so I always tell people to really focus on the quality of the ingredients and then get educated. So find a source that you respect and you understand and learn all you can. So get as much information as you can so that you are in control of this process, right? Get in control. Get it. You mentioned before, like health advocacy. You are the biggest advocate of your health because nobody else cares about your body as much as you do. And then incorporate biohacking into your life. So do simple things like do 5 minutes of meditation. Wake up, don't think about anything for 5 minutes. Focus on improving your sleep. Do time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. Do things like that with light exposure to really improve how you feel, but overall your health. I think if you do those 5 things, you will have success and you'll find, it's going to be much easier to maintain this kind of way of eating.
Those are excellent tips. And what's the best purchase you've ever made for your ketogenic lifestyle?
This was a hard question. This is a really hard question because I don't know how to dial it down to one thing. If I were to say one thing, and this is kind of a toss-up, but I would say I'm going to give you 2 things because I have to. So first thing would be a ketone glucose meter. So a lot of people will try to do a ketogenic lifestyle, say, things aren't working. I don't know why. So I'll ask them, okay, well, what are your ketones? What are your glucose? And they don't know. How do you know if something is going to work if you don't know what the values are? Number 2, get a really good book. So the best purchase I can recommend is get a book on keto. that you value the resource. If you do those two things, you have, data to back up what you're doing and to kind of direct you, and then you have the information that you need to really be successful.
Those are great.
So those two things.
And what would you put on a billboard for people to see about keto and biohacking?
Yeah. I think I need more than one billboard. I need like 3 billboards like that movie. I would say don't give up. So a lot of people get frustrated, I'm sure you see this, pretty typical. They start, they're excited, they're energized, they lose about 10 pounds. Most of that is water and glycogen, and then they stall and it's not working. And it's my genes, it's something, it's not going to work for me, or this is like every other fad diet out there. It doesn't work. Well, that's not true. So I would say don't give up. Keep finding out what works for you, keep testing, and really push yourself, because if you maintain this and if you find what works for you, the health will come and the weight will come off.
That's great. That's very inspirational. You've shared so much knowledge with us today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. And I know you're working on some exciting projects. So what can people look out for next from you?
Yeah, thanks. This is going to be a busy year, I think, for the keto world and definitely for myself. So I'm doing a podcast with Jimmy Moore called the Ketohacking MD podcast. And so we go into nutrition, but also biohacks that you can do to improve your health. And we're working on a book together that's going to come out either end of the year or early next year. I'll be at a few conferences talking, so KetoCon, Low Carb Cruise, and then I'm involved in some actual medical research studies that'll come out probably late next year, which will be exciting. And then, I'm pretty busy with just clients and looking forward to meeting and interacting with more people in the keto community.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that research sounds very, very interesting. So it'll be great to look out for that. And where can people find you online? Where are you the most active?
I'm pretty original. So my Instagram and Twitter is John Limansky MD. Website is johnlimanskymd.com. So, feel free to email me, text me on Instagram, and I'm pretty accessible. So that's probably the best way.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here today with us, John. There was so much that we got to talk about. I really had to make a huge effort to cut it as short as possible because there's so much more.
Well, we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely. And, we can take questions from listeners too, because I know people have a ton of questions for you. So thanks so much for being here with us today and sharing all of your knowledge.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.
Hey guys, that was today's episode. I hope that you had as much fun listening as I had talking to Dr. Limansky about biohacking and keto. We could have talked for hours more just talking about how powerful this lifestyle has been for both of us. And it's an incredibly powerful protocol, like Dr. Limansky was saying, that's been used for years, with disease treatment. But it can also be, if it's really done well, an incredible way to prevent disease, to live life in a fat-fueled zone where you're primarily being fueled off therapeutic ketones. There's so many incredible benefits to keto. And you all know that I believe in that quite a bit because I follow ketogenic lifestyle myself. But what I really loved about today's conversation is we got to talk about so many different aspects of a ketogenic lifestyle. And also, what is a ketogenic lifestyle and optimal keto like for you as a person, as an individual? What does it mean for you in terms of mental clarity or energy or mood stability or freedom from food fixation? There's so many different aspects to what being in ketosis means for an individual person. And I really think that there's so many benefits that can be gleaned from following a ketogenic lifestyle. Even if you don't follow it all the way or be extreme about it, if you just are eating less sugar, less refined foods, less flour, and you're eating more whole real foods, you're eating more meats that are organic, free of hormones, that are grass-fed, you're eating higher quality food, using good oils, all these different things, to optimize the diet that you're providing your body so that it can generate, really healthy, strong new tissue. And you can also be fueled from ketones, which are pretty incredible. So keto is not necessarily for everyone, but if it is a lifestyle that you have chosen, I think that John put it so well when he talked about what optimal ketosis was for him and just feeling happy in his body, feeling good in his body, and having so much freedom to go and live life and do the things that, you love doing. And so I love that definition of optimal ketosis. So if you'd like to learn more about John, you can find him on Instagram, on various social media, and his website. And if you'd like to learn more about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge, I mentioned it about halfway through the interview, but if you want to learn more about doing keto with my help, I have the challenge available at ketogenicgirlcom, and you can find me, ask me any questions about it on Facebook at The Ketogenic Girl and at Ketogenic Girl on Instagram. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave me a review and rating. I would absolutely love to read it and see it, and it really helps with a new podcast to get feedback from listeners who have something to say. So I would love to hear your review and see it for myself. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have a fat-fueled week and can't wait to join you guys on the next episode. Bye for now. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with a ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.